In the US, we use a lot of real estate on the storage of private vehicles. Today, we're going to touch on why that is as we survey the 10 most absurdly large parking lots in the United States. This is City Nerd, weekly content on cities and transportation. Viewer-suggested topics, always welcome down in the comments. And I don't think anyone specifically suggested this topic, but I've had it on my list to do something around parking for quite a while now, so here we go. This is going to be a top 10 list, of course, but as always, a top 10 list on this channel is really just a Trojan horse for my breathtakingly insightful commentary on urban environments and how we get around them. So the intention here is to survey the largest parking lots in the US, but as always, this was not nearly as straightforward as I had hoped. For example, if you Google biggest parking lots in the US, the first name that comes up is the West Edmonton Mall, which is just kind of an unsatisfactory answer on multiple levels. But also, the results end up being about parking structures, which are interesting, but not really what I wanted for this video. Structured parking is definitely trip intensive, but maybe not as purely wasteful a use of urban land, which I don't know, it's probably debatable. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Anyway, what I really wanted were the 10 largest parking footprints. So just to define terms, when I say parking lot, what I'm usually talking about are multiple contiguous lots. So for example, Disneyland / California Adventure in Anaheim has just a ton of parking, but like half of it is way down off Catella. It's not contiguous at all, so I just can't count it all together. We'll talk about this more once we get into it. And fair warning, I did my best, but I'm not at all confident that I didn't miss something here. So I will talk about how I did this as we go through. So if you can find me a location you think should have made the cut and you think I just flat out missed it, let me know down in the comments. Okay, that's all the preliminaries I'm gonna do, so let's just get into it. Number 10 is the Texas Motor Speedway in Fort Worth, which is huge. It has a capacity of around 182,000 spectators. You're going to see that I'm only counting paved parking areas, and we'll talk more about this later, but a couple things. One, if it's a grass parking area that likely remains unused 99% of the year, that's less offensive to me than impervious surface. And second, if I included all the informal parking areas, racetracks would have completely dominated this list. So this is a lot of paved area, and this apparently exists within the city limits of the 13th largest city in the US, which, I don't know, I just find kind of crazy. Number 9, we're going to Philadelphia, where all 3 of the major sports venues are co-located, as well as a casino hotel. So what you're going to find with this list is, unless it's a racetrack with a spectator capacity in the 6 figures, you really need to have co-located major attractions to break the top 10. And with Philly, it's still weird to me that this much surface parking exists within 3 miles of the downtown of really one of our great cities, especially since it's not as if there isn't good transit in the area. So brief timeout to talk about just how it is that we end up with these enormous parking craters. I'm willing to bet that everything you see on this list is the result of a study by a licensed professional engineer. You may or may not be familiar with the Institute of Transportation Engineers, or ITE, trip generation and parking generation manuals, but there may not be 2 books that better explain just how we ended up with the kind of built environment that we have in almost all of the suburban US and a lot of the urban US too. I'll probably talk more about trip gen in a future video, but the parking generation methodology is similar. The underlying data comes from a collection of studies, mostly in suburban US locations, and the manual gives you an estimate of parking demand based on an independent variable like leasable square footage if it's like retail or office, dwelling units if it's some kind of housing, students if it's a school, or say seated capacity for an entertainment venue. Anyway, in a co-located situation like this, you would hope to achieve some efficiency, and you would hope that the engineers actually accounted for the fact that it would be pretty unlikely for even 2 of these venues to be in operation at the same time. But in my experience, that's being pretty optimistic about how all this actually works. Number 8 is Kentucky Speedway in Sparta, which can accommodate 107,000 spectators. You know, if you live in a coastal city or outside the US, this might be a big blind spot for you. The number of extraordinarily large venues dedicated to stock car racing. Kentucky Speedway has tons of impervious surface, but let's talk about these unpaved surfaces too, because you do see them at nearly every large NASCAR venue. They're mostly categorized as campgrounds with bucolic sounding names: Hawks Landing, Ponderosa, Bourbon Street, and I didn't count any of these in my totals. Anyway, let me know down in the comments if you've actually been to a NASCAR event. Just looking at these enormous venues made me legit curious. I mean, is it fun? It's not exactly a bucket list item for me, but yeah, maybe. I don't know. Number 7 is Hard Rock Stadium and the grounds of the Miami Open in Miami Gardens, Florida. You know, there's just something so satisfying about a tennis center aerial. I don't know what it is. Anyway, I said I wasn't gonna count parking that isn't an impervious surface, and then Miami gives me this. And these videos are never easy, but I counted it. So let's take another quick detour now, just to convince ourselves that it really doesn't have to be this way. I've looked at Camp Nou in Barcelona in a previous video. So this time let's go to Europe's second largest football stadium, Wembley in London. There is parking here, but it's incredibly compact compared to American football stadiums. And this is just another one of the benefits of abundant transit. Your city has the freedom to use its real estate for something better. Number 6 is Gillette Stadium and the adjoining Patriot Place in Foxborough, Mass. Now we're really getting into the meat of this list, which is NFL stadiums that have other stuff attached to them. In this case, not a tennis center, but a shopping mall. You know, so you can tailgate at like Jamba Juice before the Patriots game. One thing you'll notice here, which I think is really telling, is all these parking lots, even when the footprint is shared with a mall, are over 90% empty in what I imagine is a random satellite flyover. It's pretty nuts. Number 5 is, I guess we call this NRG Park. You've got NRG Stadium, home of the Texans, the Astrodome, which is completely shuttered, and a couple smaller land uses. One thing I love about doing these videos is the weird little research rabbit holes I can go down. Like, how does the Astrodome still even exist? I had to look at what the current plans are, and the answer seems to be no plans. All kinds of ideas have been floated, but it seems the one that the county commissioners finally got behind was turning it into a huge parking garage. Houstonians, let me know what the deal is here. Quick side note, now that we're over halfway through, some land use types that I thought would make this list, but just didn't make the cut. Standalone shopping malls, theme parks, airports, large manufacturing plants, which I'll come back to, and casinos. By the way, did you know that the largest casino in the US is in Oklahoma? It's news to me. Number 4 is the MetLife Sports Complex and the American Dream shopping mall in East Rutherford, New Jersey. So now it's getting real. This is the largest stadium in the NFL, combined with the second largest shopping mall in the US. Oh, and also the old Izod Center. I don't know, the Nets have been in Brooklyn for a while, and the Devils are in Newark. So New Yorkers, let me know what the plan is here. Also, just let me know your thoughts on kind of the overall redevelopment, or I don't know, lack of redevelopment of the Meadowlands. I mean, did they find Jimmy Hoffa yet? And no, I didn't even include the racetrack in the total. Just seemed like a separate use. Number 3, we're going to Northeast Tennessee. This is the Bristol Motor Speedway, capacity 162,000, and kind of unique on the NASCAR circuit because of its kind of short half-mile oval and stadium configuration. This one's so far out there, Google doesn't even have 3D imagery, so it's really hard to convey the scale of the place. But you can see an American football field fits pretty easily inside the oval. And in fact, this is famously, or maybe not very famously, the site of the highest attendance ever at an American football game, which was the 2016 battle at Bristol between the University of Tennessee and Virginia Tech. So you've got a lot of paved parking, which I counted, and just an incredible number of campgrounds too. Farmer Bob's is my jam. Anyway, it appears that if you include camping grounds, the biggest parking areas in the US are for venues that only operate a couple times a year, where you have to drive hundreds of miles to park your car, and then after all that, you watch cars drive around in circles for a few hours. Do I have that right? Don't let anyone tell you that this isn't an amazing country. Continuing that theme, let's go to the West Coast. Number 2 is Auto Club Speedway in Fontana, California. Can I just say, it's utterly bizarre that I've made, I don't know, like 30 videos now. And there are great cities that I haven't even mentioned once, like Milwaukee. But this is the second time Fontana, California has featured in a top 10 list. Anyway, this is within the LA metro area. You're not really gonna get any campgrounds, and it's all paved area. Okay, before we get to the part of the video where you find out if you guessed number 1 correctly, just a reminder that if you're entertained by satellite imagery of hideously large parking facilities, be sure to drop a like on the video, express yourself down in the comments, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Subscriber count check. We can now fill Craven Cottage, home of perennial Premier League relegation fodder Fulham Football Club. I do love this stadium. It's super charming, right on the Thames. The only thing that would make it better is if you just, I don't know, bulldozed about 200 acres of housing and put down a huge surface lot. One day the Europeans will get it right. Honorable mentions and other research notes. The world's largest sports venue, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, actually doesn't have that much paved parking. But man, there's a suspicious number of huge empty grass lots in the nearby vicinity. Sorry, Indiana, I'm just still not convinced this is the best use of urban land. Manufacturing facilities, you've got things like the enormous Kia assembly plant in West Point, Georgia. But a lot of this is just staging areas for newly assembled vehicles, and it just didn't feel like it fit the spirit of the list. It is interesting to me that the 14 largest football stadiums in the US are college football stadiums, but they don't get anywhere near this list. I have theories on why that is, but I'd love to hear yours down in the comments. Dishonorable mention to, I don't know, Southern California. This is one of the most densely populated regions in the US, and the following venues didn't quite make the top 10, but just considering where they're located geographically and the value of real estate, they're pretty offensive. Snapdragon Stadium, formerly home of the Chargers before they abandoned San Diego. Huge parking lot, and the region invested a massive amount in a light rail stop. I don't know, the whole episode is just kind of sad. SoFi Stadium, current home of the Chargers and the Super Bowl champs, also narrowly misses this list. And Dodger Stadium, which I love the stadium itself, and the club has such a great history, but this whole thing is just shameful on every level. This is like maybe a mile from downtown LA, and just look at all the surface parking, just for a baseball stadium. And if you look into the history of Chavez Ravine and how the stadium property was acquired, the story just really doesn't get better. Okay, number 1 is State Farm Stadium, home of the Cardinals, the Gila River Arena, home of the Coyotes, and the Westgate Entertainment District, which the arena opens onto, and all these places kind of share overlapping parking areas. And you know, I threw in the Tanger outlets too, because really it just feels like it's the same place. And honestly, if you want to park at the outlet mall for like 4 hours and come back after the game and, I don't know, browse for some factory defect khakis at 70% off retail price, is anyone really gonna stop you? Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Thanks for joining. Keep the great topic suggestions coming, and I'll be back with a new episode next week. I'll see you then.